Kansas State falls in overtime to Drake. So what does that mean, and where do we go from here?
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on in to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rao. You can find me on Twitter X at Christian S. Rao. And thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Welcome back to my everydayers. If you were listening just over this last episode, you had me talking about the preview, the men's basketball preview with Drake at the Wildcat Classic. Well, unfortunately, my prediction didn't come true. And that 10-day break obviously didn't really come into fruition because there is a lot of issues still with this men's basketball team. Kansas State falls to Drake in overtime, 73-70 on Tuesday night in Kansas City at the T-Mobile Center, 73-70. And at one time, Drake was up by 20 points in the first half. You know, it was an absolute just shocker to begin the game with Kansas State after the 10-day layoff, after the St. John's issue in the second half. You get 10 days off to try and fix it, and they come out more dull than the second half in that St. John's game. It was one of those concepts where we continue to talk about how bad that second half in the St. John's game was, and then you go into that first half, and Kansas State said, "Hold my beer. Watch this. Let me show you how bad we can actually be." Because that's how it felt, at least for the first 15 minutes of that game. And it started to change a little bit towards the end of the first half. They started to get a little bit more momentum. I will say this, the fans, the purple fans, the ones in purple, Kansas State fans that were at that game were incredible. And even when they were down, they were still showing some hope. But when that 5 minutes in the first half left, it was starting to change. You could feel the momentum shifting. And I put a lot of that on the fans. And I think Jerome Tang and the rest of the team does as well. And he talked about that. We're going to get to that later on in the show, his comments, because there are worth talking about, him and Coleman Hawkins after the game. But where do we go from here? That's one of the biggest questions, and that's what we're going to get to in this episode, because there is really a lot of questions with this Kansas State basketball squad. Now 6-4. Now, they did lose to a Drake team that has not lost a game yet this season, right? So when you look at the statistics and the rankings, and there's net rankings and KenPom and all that good stuff, you could really dive in to all of those data points. And we're not going to really do that on this show today, but we will at some point. But today, Drake moves to 10-0. Kansas State moves to 6-4. But Drake is overall looking like a better basketball team than Kansas State was. More 35 minutes of the game, including overtime, Drake was the better ball team. Now, there were some moments towards the end of that first half, at the beginning of the second half, that Kansas State showed that they can continue to be that team that perseveres. They showed high energy at that moment in those times between the final 5 minutes of that first half and the beginning of the second half, but they couldn't, once again, put a full team, a full game all together. And that is the biggest concern with this team, as there's only one non-conference game left before heading into Big 12 play. Now, the Big 12 has had some issues themselves this year, because not only does Kansas State have 4 non-conference losses, but multiple teams in the Big 12 have multiple non-conference losses. It's not just Kansas State. And it's teams that you'd expect to be at the top as well, like Kansas State. Teams like Arizona are not doing well. But that doesn't change the fact that they are still in the toughest conference in college basketball. The Big 12 is the toughest conference when it comes to college basketball. If you don't believe me, debate a door. That's how I feel about that one. But it's going to be a really tough ride for Kansas State if they cannot pull it together, if they cannot play a full 40 minutes, and in this case, even farther with an overtime play. Coach Tang took it on him. He said it was his fault, and we're going to talk about that later on in this show. But overall, it was just really a dreadful game from the beginning to the end. And if you want to take the good from it, I think you should. You'd have to say that those teams bounced back at one point. But let's start from the very beginning. They were down at one point by 20 points. And it was a dreadful first half. And like, as I mentioned, that first 15 minutes, it was awful. Down, I think it was 29-9, I believe is what it was at one point. And they just couldn't get anything falling. They were shooting from behind the arc. At one point, they started off the game 0 for 7 before they hit their next 4 3-pointers. And that's when it kind of started to shift in that final 5 minutes of the first half. But Kansas State couldn't get anything going at the beginning of the game. The team did bounce back at that final 5 minutes and in the second half, but began to stumble again towards the end. Towards that final 4 minutes, I believe it was, in regulation, they didn't have a basket. And then they struggled in overtime as well. Now, going into overtime, I thought that was going to be a good thing because in the Coach Tang era, they hadn't lost. They were 12-0 heading into this game with Coach Tang on the bench for them heading into overtime. Well, now it's 12-1. They fall on a buzzer beater shot, what felt like, from Drake. It was a great 3-point shot by Coleman Hawkins in overtime to tie the game, but they left him too much time. They did not get back and play enough defense, and they lose the game on a 3-pointer themselves, falling 73-70. So now the record sits at 6-4 with one conference game left. Wichita State, who just lost actually to Kansas City on Tuesday. So if they can't win that game, I mean, there's just huge concerns. There's just huge concerns, more than we're already at right now. But where we're sitting at this second, right now, what is the problems with Kansas State? What happened, right? Well, there were some interesting moments and interesting things that happened in this game to begin with. First of all, they started a whole different – the starting five was different with Kansas State. And they went with Castillo as the guard to begin it, and that didn't really last long. He played just a few minutes before coming out. Coach Tang did say in his press conference that he thought that he wanted to get him in. And they kept talking about the buy-in, which we talked about in yesterday's episode, how the buy-in was something that they were really pushed in that 10 days and how some of these players sounded like deserved to get maybe a little bit more minutes because they were showing that buy-in. And I think that's where it's at. I think that's why Castillo got the start, in my opinion, is because of how practices went. Maybe he deserved that spot. Maybe he was showing high energy. Maybe he was being that kind of team player, that type of role player, or whatever the case may be, that Coach Tang and his coaching staff was looking for. However the case may be, it didn't work out at the beginning of the game. It really didn't. He finished the game with 16 minutes, only had 3 points, only had 3 assists, and he struggled, really. He really did. He did have one nice 3-point shot. I will give him that, and that was his only bucket of the game. But overall, he did struggle. And I think they need to second guess on maybe having him start moving forward, especially when we get the Big 12 play. Maybe you give him one more shot against Wichita State, maybe. But then again, I take that back. I think you need to have your best lineup out there, what you are ready to take on in Big 12 play, because this is your last, and dare I say, tune-up game, right? Is it a tune-up game? Is it? Because right now, I don't know where Kansas State sits. I think they need more than a tune-up game. They need like 5 or 6 because they're just not ready for Big 12 play. And this could get really rough really quick. I hope I'm wrong, but I was proved wrong in my preview yesterday. I expected this team to win. I think I said it was 75-64. I think I said the final score was my prediction. I was pretty close on the points-wise, but Drake went ahead and won this game in overtime. Looking at the overall stats, Coleman Hawkins did lead the team with 16 points, 38 minutes. He did play a little bit more. I'm glad that happened. And now that was because of the overtime, obviously, as well. 6 for 9 from the field, 1 for 2 from from 3-point land. He did struggle with the free throws, though. That's something we're going to get to when we discuss his discussion in postgame. Overall, I'm just disappointed. And I think I'm a little bit jumbled all around on this episode today because I am a little disappointed with this squad. And you can blame NIL, you can blame the transfer portal, you can blame commitment or buy-in, whatever you want to do with this case. But regardless of the fact, this Kansas State team and the Kansas State fans know that this team should be playing better basketball based on past records, past history of what this team has done, what each of these players have done at prior stops, putting them all together. It should be coming out after you bring it out of the oven. It should present as a nice, great thing of basketball. And we're not seeing that. So where do we go from here? We're going to get to that. But first, I want to talk about Jerome Tang's press conference after the game, as well as Coleman Hawkins. We're going to do that right here on Locked On Kansas State. But first, get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. So never waste a hunch and make FanDuel your one-stop shop. Never waste a hunch and make every moment count with FanDuel, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Today's also sponsored by Prize Picks. This one's really interesting to me because I think Prize Picks is really fun. Prize Picks with the best place to get real money and to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions in dollars in award-winning. Prize Picks have made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. All you have to do in this case is either pick more or less at at two players for a shot to win up to $1,000 in cash. If you're thinking about the Kansas City Chiefs, if you think Patrick Mahomes is ready to go, you think he's going to be ready for this next game, maybe he's not sitting out, I have a feeling that maybe those odds might be a little lower. If you think he's going to be over more or less with the passing yards, might be your time to put that in. Maybe Travis Kelce finally gets some of that respect he deserves, gets a touchdown instead of maybe Noah Gray. Get that over for touchdown. There's a good spot for Prize Picks. Go ahead and put that one in if you think Mahomes is going to play. Make your holidays bigger and brighter with Prize Picks. It's the best place to get real money action while watching your favorite sports. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on Prize Picks if you're willing to do so. Prize Picks now offers MasterCard for quick and easy deposits into your account on sports season. Join now. This holiday season is giving away 2 free picks in December, and they're giving away guaranteed prizes. And they're giving away $30+ million in awards during Picksmas. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, LOCKEDONCollege, $50 instantly to play your first $5 lineup. That's it. Awesome. Prize Picks, run your game. It should be awesome. Prize Picks, run your game. And welcome back to Locked On Kansas State. I've been all over the place with this one today, and mainly because a little bit discouraged and trying not to put too much emotion into this episode today. But it's just it's tough because you're going and talking about a team that's 6-4 that is obviously underperforming, and it's frustrating. Not as someone who just covers this team, but someone who is a fan of the team as well, knowing that you can do so much better than what you're seeing on the court. That first 15 minutes. The way that they played the rest of the game, if they would have had just a little bit better start to this one and shook the cobwebs off, apparently, because those 10 days were obviously a distraction, not a blessing, like I talked about in yesterday's conversation. But if they would have started off just a little bit better in those 15 minutes, not got down by 20, this game would have been easily in the hands of Kansas State. We wouldn't have been talking about overtime. We wouldn't have been talking about the conversation of why they couldn't stop the three-pointers or hurt in transitions or any of that case. Regardless, they did lose the game 73-70 in overtime, moved to 6-4 on the season with one game left in non-conference play before they start Big 12 play. Jerome Tang sat around and talked in the post-game conference, and he put the loss on him. He didn't put it on the players. And he said that if a team can score or hold a team under 70 points or under 80 points, I believe he actually said, that means that you're playing good basketball. And I can see that. I can understand where he's going here. But he said, and he quotes, "I got to coach better at the end. Today was not our guys." And I should have said this in the quote because he said it right. When you hold a team under 70 points, that means your team gave you an effort and they executed well enough to give you a chance to win. Where I'm seeing it here is the two things to where Coach Tang could have obviously improved, and I think he said it in the post-game conference as well. The final play after the timeout in regulation. You had one chance to win the game, and you drew up a tough play. The play did not go as executed, and it wound up being an awful shot right at the buzzer. It was just it was a badly drawn-up play. And you saw that a lot in this game. It wasn't just that one, but that one's obviously egregious and sticks out because you had an opportunity to win the game and not drive this one to overtime. So, but overall, I think that was an issue. The shot selections were an issue, and it was because of how the team was moving the basketball. They were struggling outside the perimeter to get the ball into the paint. And Coach Tang said they want to be able to touch paint as much as possible. That didn't seem like to be the case. It didn't seem like to happen a lot during this game. And they would make terrible shots because they would have to. They would have no choice because they were making shots when there was 2, 1, or even close to 0 on the shot clock. They struggled with the rebounding department. And with that being said, it took the team in a different direction and overall hurt them. Drake won the rebounding battle. No surprise. 31-26. They tied in offensive rebounds. They each had 8 apiece. So there was a little bit of second chance points, not many, but it just wasn't something that was, it was definitely an impact. It was something that Kansas State needed to improve on. Now, if you want to take the data points in the paint wise, Kansas State did have 38 points in the paint compared to only 26 from Drake. Drake did really well from the 3-point line, so they didn't really need to push that. They shot 56% from behind the arc in comparison to only 33% for Kansas State. If you want to push more in the paint, I think you got to do more than 38 points out of your 70. I think you do. And I think a lot of that comes into play with how they performed in that first 15 minutes. At one point, I think I remember looking at the stat line, and I don't know if I have it saved because when you look at the stats afterwards, it's hard to find what the first half stats were when you go to a site like ESPN or something along those lines. But actually, I do have it right here. So when you're looking at the first half, field goal percentage wise, Kansas State was 47% from the field goal after first half. And that is obviously what happened in that last 5 minutes. Those last 5 minutes were outstanding. But they were 4 from 11 from the 3-point line. 4 for 11. They did 14 of their points from the paint during that time. And they did have 6 turnovers in the first half. A lot of that happened in that first 15 minutes. That final 5 minutes of the game, they were great. They looked really good. And they looked like a team that could win that game and could compete with other teams in the Big 12. But they couldn't put it all together in a 40-minute, saga, if you will. And obviously it was longer than that with the overtime period. Coleman Hawkins also said some things in post-game that were interesting. And some of it was directed towards the fans. And I don't know if he meant to direct it towards the fans as a whole or just talking about one situation. But he did say that, quote, "I can't go on my phone without people wishing the worst for me, wishing not just for me, but for our team. And it devastates me. I just went on my phone and saw someone say, 'I hope you break your leg.'" Now, I'm guessing this is a direct message. It wasn't something that was actually tweeted or on a different social media site. There was some people that were looking around for that just this afternoon, and they couldn't find it. So, again, I'm guessing that it was a DM. He does have his DMs open. But if you're in this NIL stage, and I don't know if I want to take this take, but I think it's something that you have to mention. I really do think you do. This is a brand new era that we're in right now with NIL. Brand new. You're getting paid millions of dollars, which is something that is new in this college landscape, even though it's been happening for a few years now. It's still new. In the grand scheme of things, it's still pretty fresh. So if you're getting paid millions of dollars to play a basketball game, there are going to be fans that are upset in a different light, in a different way. And I'm not advocating that whatever this person said is the right thing, because it's not. That's dreadful. You shouldn't do that. This is a basketball game when it's all said and done, folks. But I don't think that speaks for the entire Kansas State fanhood. That's for sure. I don't think that speaks for the community. And I hope that Hawkins isn't taking that as a whole thing of Kansas State. It's one bad apple, and it couldn't not even be a bad apple. It might just be a burner account. Who knows? Regardless, it was interesting that he decided to make that decision now. I think there are a lot of pressures, a lot of new pressures that NIL is causing Kansas State, something that they're not used to. And that's a weird situation to be in. You have your collectives sticking up for this team, for this program, willing to put money in. And then when the money is actually into this program, you lay an egg. It's not a good sign, because why is the community, why is the collectives, why are the fans going to be willing to do it again if they can't appropriate the money the right way moving forward? That's a tough situation to be in. And I understand that there's some pressures, and you can tell that Coach Tang and the players and the rest of the staff are feeling it. You got to figure it out. You don't have an excuse. You got to figure it out. The NIL money is doing what it needs to be done. What they did in the transfer portal, they brought in the right players. Apparently, at least we thought that was the case. You got to get it done. There is no reason why we should head into the Big 12 play and not finish at least 500 in conference. Not with this roster, not with this NIL. There's no reason. And if they don't, after spending all this money, if you want your fans, if you want your collective to do the same thing the following year and year after that and continue that process to maintain a competitive team on the court or in the football field in the aspects of other sports, if it doesn't happen, changes will probably have to be made. It's an interesting thing. It's a disappointing thing for some fans who love certain coaches or certain players. But if it doesn't work out in this age, loyalty obviously is not becoming a rare instance these days. Maybe you have to make that move faster than a player can move into the portal, or maybe make that change of a coach, even if it is a high buyout. You never know. Something to keep in mind as we get in the conference play, because there are going to be lots of things to talk about when they go into play a very tough Big 12 conference. I can't stress it enough, folks. This is a very tough conference. And if Kansas State thinks that they're going to be able to play the basketball that they're playing right now, losing against Drake, losing against Liberty, losing against LSU, losing against St. John's, where most of those games, I'll say 3 out of those 4 losses should have been wins. This should be a 9-1 team. I think LSU, I think overall that game, I think shouldn't have won that game. I think LSU beat us. Should have beat Liberty. Yeah. Should have beat Drake. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the way that we played in that first half of that St. John's game, there's no doubt in my mind we should have won that one. This should be a 9-1 basketball team, and we're sitting at 6-4. Should that give you hope for the Big 12? Should that give you hope for a possible NCAA tournament bid, knowing that they're underperforming and there's still a lot to be discovered with this team? Well, that's what we're going to talk about next. Where do we go from here? Right here on Locked On Kansas State. But first, this episode is sponsored by the College Football Playoffs. It's that time of the year. The College Football Playoff is back. And with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT sports coverage of the College Football Playoffs begins on December 21st, starting with the College Football Playoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into our first matchup. SMU Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern, so don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the College Football Playoffs presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. I'm excited for the College Football Playoffs. I really am this weekend. It's unfortunate that Kansas State's not there, but there's a lot of things to be excited about. If you are interested, by the way, and you're talking about in the Big 12 bias of things, the winner of the Clemson Tigers and Texas Longhorns game will be heading to take on Arizona State. So just keep that in mind when you're watching college football this weekend. Welcome on back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. While we're here for your second listen, check out Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin. He's talking about everything under the sun when you're talking about the college football playoffs and so much more. Transfer portal, coaches hiring, firing, you name it. Spencer's got you covered. So check them out for your second listen of the day. We're talking about the loss of Drake from Kansas State, 73-70 in overtime. Now 12-1 in the Tang era in overtime. It's unfortunate that they did lose that. Wichita State's up on the schedule next. They did just lose to Kansas City. You got to win that game. You have to. I don't even know what kind of conversation we can have if they lose that game. I don't even know. I don't know. Does the seat become warm to flaming hot if they lose against Wichita State? Like, I don't even know where you go from there. But overall, if you look at the snapshot from this season, they are 6-4. They have losses to LSU, St. John's, Liberty, and now Drake. As I mentioned just a few minutes ago, I believe this team should be 9-1, but could have, should have, would have. In hindsight, that's where we are in the world. We are 6-4. A dominant win should be in the books against Wichita State. And I say should. Let's hope that we are in for a shocker. You see what I did there? I'm bad at dad jokes. You know, I am a dad. I got a daughter. She's almost 3, but I am terrible at dad jokes. I got to get better at that. So if you got good ones for me, let me know in the comment description below. You know, looking ahead to the Big 12 conference play too, you know, and I don't want to look past Wichita State, even though they just lost to Kansas City. The way that the Kansas State's been playing so far this season, I don't think you can look past any opponent. But I think we have to at least get an idea of what we have coming up from the Big 12 conference moving up. We end the year on the 30th of December against 19th ranked Cincinnati. And I think they're better than 19th. I think they're a very good basketball team. We are going to be in for, dare I say, a shock. You know, if we can't get past the Shockers, we're going to be in for a shock against the Bearcats. They are a very good basketball team. Would not surprise me in the least if we got 2 rankings coming out by then. If we get to the new rankings at that point and they're a top 15 team when we're actually playing Cincinnati, wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. Then you got TCU and then you got Oklahoma State on the road for the first 3 games of the Big 12 conference play. And then, oh, by the way, after that, you got Houston, who is underperforming, might I add, but they're still 15th ranked in the nation. This is a team that obviously is going to figure it out. I think they're going to figure it out. TCU isn't having the best season either. They're 6-4. And when you look at Oklahoma State, they are 6-3, and they haven't been the best team as of right now. So if you can get past Wichita State, if you can make an upset or get back on the right spot, and it shouldn't even be upset because this team should be close to having a number next to their name too. At 9-1, they should be, right? But they're not. If they can get back on the right path against Cincinnati, you're looking at an 8-4 record, sure. But then you head into TCU, you head into Oklahoma State. This team could start off 3-0 in the Big 12 conference. At worst, they could start off 2-1. And that is a huge need if you're going to try and run the gauntlet in this conference. I think you have to go at least 10-10 in the Big 12 to even be seen as a bubble team this year. And some of those wins on the 10-10 schedule have to be some quality wins too. Got to be against ranked opponents. They can't all be against Oklahoma States and TCUs. And in this case, Arizona's at the bottom right now, which is surprising. You got to think they're going to figure it out, right? You got to think that's going to happen. Tommy Lloyd's a really good coach. So where do we go from here? In the next 21 games that are left on the schedule, this team has to go 11-10 in order to be at least a bubble team in my mind. 11-10. Does that sound so hard? Does that sound like an impossible task? Well, if you watched the game last night and you only watched the first 15 minutes, I think you wouldn't even think you'd win double-digit wins this year. If you watched the middle of the game, the last 5 minutes of the first half and the beginning of the second half, you would think this team's a Final Four team. And then if you watch the end of regulation and the end of overtime, you'd think this team couldn't even compete in the NIT. It's really hard to find out what this team is. And it's crazy that we're still asking that question after 10 games. We have one more non-conference game to figure it out. After that, it's down to the gauntlet in the Big 12. I'm still thinking we can figure it out. I still think we can go 500 in the conference, but the concerns are getting there. My optimism is slowly dying, folks. Let's hope it doesn't happen before the year's over. Wichita State game is coming soon. We'll have that covered, as well as transfer portal talk and the women's basketball game tonight. We'll have that covered here as well, right here on Locked On Kansas State. But until then, please like the video, please subscribe, and we'll be back here next time for another episode of Locked On Kansas State.